So the theme of open source and new forms of audience engagement are deeply associated with the Bay Area. And at this meeting, what we're hoping to do is to take advantage of and reflect the area's history of innovation and risk-taking. A very noted San Francisco author is Rebecca Solnit, and she wrote in one of her volumes, which I would highly recommend, called Infinite Cities, that, quote, "The place that is San Francisco has both a literal geography as the tip of the peninsula that juts upward like a hitchhiking thumb, and another cultural geography as the most left part of the left coast, the un-American place where America invents itself." So think about that. So in the next 3 days, I hope we can all explore, using the example of the Bay Area, the future of the Jewish museums throughout the country, and in fact, since many of you are here from other countries, in the global scene. We also wanted to recognize the role and history of the Jews of San Francisco, coming with the gold rush and creating most of the civic, educational, cultural, and philanthropic infrastructure of the city from the middle of the 19th century to today. These Jews, as those of you who saw this morning's screening of American Jerusalem know now, and you know it well, they were progressive, entrepreneurial, and philanthropic from the start. And today, in Silicon Valley, Jews are well represented among the digital pioneers, social capital investors, and corporate leaders who have changed the way America and the world interacts, connects, communicates, gives back, and learns. Their innovations and disruptions have influenced the work of all museums, including Jewish museums. I want to introduce our opening presenter, Nina Simon. With our theme, and here on the West Coast, I can think of no one more suitable than to get us started than Nina. How many of you know of Museum 2.0 blog or have read the Participatory Museum? Okay, well, many of you have. Over 20,000 copies of the Participatory Museum have been sold, and more than 150,000 people around the world have accessed the free online version. And I know she didn't do this because she knew she was coming here today, but in Nina's March 4th blog post for Museum 2.0, she has reflected on the fact that the Participatory Museum was published 5 years ago. So that blog post is titled, "The Participatory Museum 5 Years Later." And I know she'll embellish this bit, but I wanted to call out two things, reasons that she wrote the book. One, to explore the how of participatory design in museums, cultural centers, libraries, and science centers. And two, to create a version of her blog that was more shareable with organizational leaders and trustees. And in her blog, Nina also suggests some changes in her thinking since writing that book. One, humans are the best agents of participation. Quote, "If participation was my mantra from 2007 to 2011, community has been my mantra since then." And second, participation is political. Terms like inclusive, which we are going to explore in a number of settings here, are still highly contested when put into action. So as you can imagine, Nina is in high demand, and she balances her many requests as a speaker and presenter with her other duties, which include being the director of a museum. So we are especially grateful to Nina for taking the time to drive up here from Santa Cruz and to spend today with us, both in this session and in a later session on really working specifically with community that will happen after 4 o'clock today. So won't you all help me in welcoming Nina Simon.
Thank you. I guess if you heard about the Jews of San Francisco, I am one of the few Jews of Santa Cruz and really thrilled to be up here with you today. Can we switch over the slides? Sweet, thank you. So in the next 40 minutes, I've been asked to talk a little bit to frame up this idea of open source and opening up museums for us to be able to have some dialogue and for us also to all get on our feet and do an activity. I think we can do it, and so I am looking to all of you as my co-conspirators in making these next 40 minutes wonderful and fast-paced and active. If you want to follow up with me, I will be here today, but also feel free to hit me on Twitter at my Twitter handle, or I have cards with me if you want to follow up in a variety of ways. So today I wanted to really reflect on this idea of open source and what it's meant for me and for us down in Santa Cruz to open up our museum to our community in a whole new way. As MARSHA mentioned, I run the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. We're a museum of contemporary art and local history in downtown Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is a town of about 60,000 people. Our museum is right in the middle of downtown, about a 15,000 square foot building, not a big museum. And when I came to the, I came to the museum having prior been a consultant and really working on this idea of Museum 2.0. And the framing of that for me comes from this very simple definition of Web 2.0. Web 2.0 is what people used to call social media. It doesn't get used as much now. But when it was first coined, Tim O'Reilly, who runs O'Reilly Media, had this very beautiful, simple definition, which is that Web 2.0 is software that gets better the more people use it. The more hits that come in on Google, the more likes you put on something on Facebook, the more it subtly changes the platform and changes the content that's there. And in the early 2000s, I was living in Washington, D.C. with my husband, who was in startup land in the tech world, and got really curious about this question of how do we take all the energy of this open source space on the web and translate it into a museum setting. And so I got really interested in this question. How can our work, how can our museums, how can our cultural institutions get better the more people participate? How could we comparably look at every visitor who walks in the door, not as somebody who we are going to provide service to, but somebody who is going to make the museum better, not just for their own experience, but for the person who comes after them? And it's really been this question that's driven me over the last several years, first as a consultant and now as a museum director. I came to the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History in May of 2011, and at the time we had two really big problems. The first was money. We didn't have any. The day I walked in, we had $16,000 in the bank, $30,000 in unpaid bills, no endowment, no secret donor we could go to, and we were really on the brink. And I know a lot of museums and nonprofits after the recession were struggling. We were struggling at that breaking point, absolutely. But we also had another problem, and that problem was about relevance, that more people knew that our museum used to be the county jail than knew what was currently happening in there. And I looked at these two challenges, and for us, they were an incredible opportunity. You know, sometimes the only time you have the clarity and the urgency to really make change and get things done is when you are up against the wall. As somebody once said to me, you should never let a good crisis go to waste. And in the case of our museum, our board decided now is the time we are ready to hire a 29-year-old executive director with no management or fundraising experience and feel that this is a good idea. Over the last 4 years, we've had some really incredible success, and we've been able to transform our museum by doing three things: by making it a participatory place, by making it a place of bridging, and by being experimental. So on the participation side, we believe that art and history are not just something you look at and learn about, but something you do. That is pervasive throughout our whole organization. The minute you walk in the lobby, you'll see a comment board where you can share ideas about how to improve the museum. We invite people to actively co-produce programming with us to share their own artistic skills with each other in our space. This also extends to exhibitions. This is from an exhibition we did called Memory Jars, where we filled a room floor to ceiling with mason jars and invited people to bottle up their own memories, creating a collection of our diverse stories and memories in our community. And it's been something that we've taken even further. This is an exhibition we have up right now called Everybody's Ocean. It's a massively crowdsourced exhibition of art about the ocean. We turned nobody away. We were concerned when we launched this that nobody would show up. Instead, we have had absolutely the reverse problem. Hundreds of artists showing up in a rainstorm with their artwork, wanting it on the walls. This show has been a real challenge for us, but it's also drawn for a small regional art and history museum some new kinds of attention, including a front section Wall Street Journal article this past fall. So participation is a key part for us, this idea that when you invite people to make and to be part of it, you invite them not only to be invested, but to really be empowered through the experience. The second piece for us is about the community experience and this idea of social bridging. You know, on the conference theme, it talks about building a common capital together. And we use social capital theory actively in our work at the museum. Robert Putnam, who invented the term social capital or is attributed with doing so, he talks about this idea that there are two ways to build social capital. One is bonding capital. That's the capital you build with people who are like you, with your friends, your family, your loved ones. Those are the people who make you feel confident and strong every day. But the other kind of capital you build is bridging capital. And that's the capital you build with people who are not like you. So when you walk down the street, you see people who are different from you and you feel positively towards them instead of feeling fearful or negative. And the bridging capital is so essential when we think about the issues that really divide us, whether it's something as ongoing racism or income inequality, or whether it's something like genocide. It's really bridging. When that breaks down, that's when those real challenges happen. And so we decided at our museum, you know what? At almost all museums, we support bonding. People come with their family, they come with their friends, they have a great time. And so we decided where we need to focus is on the bridging side, because the bonding will happen no matter what, but the bridging we have to consciously work towards. And so we like to think of our museum as deliberately unhip. If you look at this picture, you'll see what I'm talking about in terms of being a place where there are families with small children, where there are older adults, where there are people who identify as artists, where there's a homeless guy in the background, all enjoying and being convivial in the same space. And we spend a lot of time designing our programming to bridge people across difference, whether that be collaborators. This is a graffiti artist and a knitter who became new artistic collaborators because they were put next to each other at an event of ours. Or whether they be visitors. We design our spaces intentionally to encourage people to engage with people who are strangers to them, not necessarily in the deepest, darkest conversation. Maybe it's just about sharing scissors at a collage table. Maybe it's about playing with something together. Maybe it's just about the fact that instead of having one chair or one pair of headphones, we always have two or three, trying to constantly create that sense that this is a space where you can connect with somebody who's different from you. And finally, our third strategy is just about being experimental. You know, I came in at a really tough time for our museum, and really, honestly, frankly, a tough time for all of our museums. And we feel and know that the only way we're going to be relevant, the only way we're going to survive and succeed is by continuing to push our own boundaries and to experiment with what a museum can be. And so, based on these three strategies, no blockbuster exhibits, no, magic pots of money, we've had incredible success. In 3 years, we went from about 17,000 to 52,000 annual visitors. We were able to double our staff. We were able to more than double our budget. And for the first time, we were able to build up reserves. And again, this happened because people felt involved. They felt invested. They felt that there was something there for them. And it was not fancy. It was not flashy. It was Post-its. It was collage making. It was fire art. It was the things that speak to and are of and by our community. And so I thought, and I guess I should also say that while these numbers are important, they're certainly important to me as a manager, really in some ways what's even more important is what we were hearing from people as well. People like this person saying, I'm really enjoying the vibe here that you all have created. We are in Santa Cruz. Your vision, energy, creativity, and community building have really added a lot to Santa Cruz. And we hear again and again from visitors. Just Friday night, we had another one of our first Fridays, and people come up to our staff and come up to our volunteers in their red Ma aprons and say, thank you for what you're doing for Santa Cruz. And I can't tell you how awesome it feels, not just to feel like we have visitors who love the exhibits or the content of our experience, but that they feel that we're helping make a difference in our whole community. And so I thought what I'd share today would be just a couple of things that I've learned about really being able to make this kind of thing happen, really with an open source mindset. And the first and most important is just to really make sure that everywhere you possibly can, you're inviting people to be involved meaningfully. I know there's a session later this afternoon about participation. Has it gone too far? Is it superficial? It can be superficial. But if you are constantly thinking about that person walking in the door and thinking, how could this person help me? How could this person help us build a stronger museum, build a stronger community? If you have that genuine desire in your mind, you're going to create a meaningful opportunity for them to participate. This can happen in a lot of different ways. Here's a non-meaningful opportunity to participate. This is a shot from a visitor comment book at a museum in New Zealand, the Auckland War Memorial. I was walking around with their director, and she said to me, "See, Nina, this is what happens when we invite people to participate. And this is not very meaningful." And I would agree that this is not very meaningful interaction. I would also note, however, that I believe this book is the kind of book that you put out in a hotel lobby or maybe a funeral home for people to be able to write that they were there. There's no sense from the museum's perspective that they are actively interested in what people have to contribute in their comments about this exhibit, and so people screw around. Similarly, we see this on the web all the time, you know, that we have these open platforms that are not designed to really invite meaningful action. You know, do I think that these people are idiots? No. I think that these people are operating in a designed environment that isn't inviting more of them. In contrast, here is one of the most trivial ways that we invite people to participate at our museum. So we're a small museum, and as you heard, we went through some financial crisis. We early on decided, you know what? When we need stuff for activities at the museum, we are going to ask our visitors for them. And so this is a snapshot from one of our e-newsletters. About once a month, we ask for something, and we say, hey, we need some cardboard boxes. I thought this was originally about us being thrifty and finding a way to get some stuff. And what we found instead was that this part of our e-blast is the most interactive part, the one that is most clicked on, because people are invited to meaningfully participate. And in the case of the cardboard boxes, there was a guy who actually wrote a blog post about, boy, I don't even know why that was there right then. I guess I'll come back to it. Remember the cardboard boxes. I mentioned earlier the memory jars. If you think about this kind of project where we were just saying to people, bottle up a memory, share it with this whole community, share it in this space. We were amazed by the diversity of what people did here. We had over 650 people who shared their memories in this space. This is one of my favorites, a very powerful one from a guy named Mark saying, I remember when you were alive before Iraq and open pit burns which gave you cancer. I remember when we learned that you died in Iraq in our arms at home. I miss you, I miss you. I don't think this guy, Mark, walked into the museum thinking he was going to share that memory that day. But him doing so contributed something really incredible, something emotional and powerful to the experience, not just for him, but for all the people who are then able to come in and experience these jars. Boy. Back to the cardboard boxes. Let me tell you, start trivial, then you go to Iraq, and then back to the boxes. My slide orientation must be screwing with me. So a much more trivial version of this, when we asked for the cardboard boxes, a guy wrote a blog post about how seeing that ask inspired him to clean out his garage, which his wife had been asking him to do forever, and to put all of his cardboard boxes on his bike trailer and bike them down to the museum. These cardboard boxes later became a cardboard castle. This is a staff meeting while the castle was being constructed, which then became the background for a set for a collaborative opera, a children's opera that was co-created with kids and visitors and then performed at the museum. And when I saw this progression, it was the first time I realized, oh, now I understand why people care so much about this cardboard box thing, because they have something that is crap for them, that is causing them a problem, and they get to see it turn into magic, and they get to be part of that. They don't need to be creative. They don't need to build the castle. They just need to get the boxes out of the garage, and they feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. As we started doing more and more of this work, we started to see people change their relationship with the museum and how they thought about us. You know, a lot of museums, we start by saying, let's just do something participatory in this gallery or in this corner or in this program. I think that's good. I think that's a good place to start. But the surprise for me has been, now that I'm in an institution where we're doing it everywhere all the time, it doesn't just mean there are more opportunities for people to engage. It means people are treating us and engaging with us differently. We've actually found on the donor side that our members, we have very small number of members who are what we would consider value members, who are members because they get in for free. We recently did a member study and found that the number one reason that people are members is because they support the work we're doing in the community. And we've just hired a development guy who comes out of kind of the social justice world, because we see that there's a different way that people are engaging with us, thinking about us as an organization for our community instead of as an organization with content or with experiences for them or their family or people like them. So some people look at what we do and they slam us and they say, gosh, you're just making cardboard castles, it's just all silly over there. And so for us, it's been really important to have a rigorous framework behind this kind of participatory work. I have a lot of photographs that look like this, because a lot of what we do is community organizing, and a lot of community organizing is boring photographs of people at tables and talking to each other. But we know that this is the work we have to do if we're really going to engage our whole community in the work that we care about. We have a community-first approach to what we do, really thinking about how do we start with a community, engage around what assets and needs exist, and then what programs can happen because of that. And last year, we decided, we really need some more framework, some more rigorous language behind what we're doing. And so we decided to write a theory of change. How many organizations here have a theory of change? I'm just curious if any do. So for us, we found this to be a really useful model for us to be able to say, how do the activities that we do lead to the impact that we seek to have? And unfortunately, in the arts, I think a lot of theories of change kind of look like this, not super rigorous. And there are two problems I see with this. One is the external problem, that I feel like funders are getting more and more, they're increasing their expectations of what they want to see, about how can you really say that that exhibition caused world peace? Show me the metrics, show me the logic of that. But we're also seeing internally that as we recruit people who are inspired by our missions, who want to make a difference, if they don't understand the logic of what activities lead to that impact, they're floating. They're unclear about how they can really have the impact that they wish to have. And so we worked over about a year to develop a theory of change that obviously you can't see the whole thing here, but it starts at the top and flows down. And at the top, we have the activities that we do, and then you can see there are 3 tracks of outcomes, one that's about strengthening bonds, one that's about building bridges across differences, and one that's about empowering participants as creative and civic agents. And it all, for us, leads to a big impact statement about building a more strong and connected community. MARSHA in her introduction mentioned this thing about participation and inclusion being political. It was a really big step for our board to decide, yes, the ultimate impact we care about, it's not about content, it's not even about something happening inside our walls, it's about helping build a stronger and more connected community. And let me tell you, that has really changed the programs we employ and the ways that we approach our work, because this is now the impact that we are trying to move towards. And then the third thing I just want to bring up before we open it up is this really comes from the open source world, thinking about platforms. I think we're all interested in ways to scale up the impact that we want to have. And one of the most daunting things about opening up to participation is this idea that how could we possibly manage those hundreds of artists with their paintings of the ocean coming in? How could we possibly manage all of the comments and the stories and the opinions that are going to come in? And the way that we've been able to think about that is taking, again, kind of a Web 2.0 approach and saying it's not about program delivery. It's not about one staff to X number of visitors. It's about how can we create a platform that can facilitate a scalable number of people to participate without requiring more staff. And again, the inspiration for this comes from the web and from projects like this one. This is a fairly trivial project called 1 Million Giraffes. It's a website that was created by a Scandinavian teenager who said, I made a bet with my friend that I can get 1 million people to make a giraffe in a non-digital way, take a photo of it, and add it to this website. He was successful. More than 1 million people made giraffes. And it says on this website, he says, I want to thank everyone who sent in a giraffe or two. You made this happen, not me. 102 countries helped out, showing how amazing the internet is. I'm forever grateful for making this an adventure I will tell my grandchildren about until they hate hearing about it. Thank you. Okay, now here's one teenager who in his spare time is collecting 1 million giraffes. And we're saying with all of our resources that we can't invite tens or hundreds of thousands or millions of people to be part of what we do. There have to be platforms to support this. I'll just share one example of a platform that we've been using to be able to expand throughout our county. So like a lot of museums, we are obviously rooted in one location, but we'd like to be in a lot of places. And as we started engaging more people, people would come to us and they'd say, hey, we want you to come to Watsonville. We want you to come to San Lorenzo. And we would say, great. And we couldn't really figure out a sustainable platform way to say yes to everybody instead of saying, well, yes over here, no over here. We only have X amount of staff. And so we worked with a University of Washington, Seattle museology graduate student on this project called a pop-up museum. A pop-up museum is a museum that is ephemeral. It just exists for a couple of hours. Anybody can make one, and they are made out of the objects that you bring with you. Here is a pop-up museum that happened near a beach about surfing. People walk up, they bring their own objects related to the theme, they handwrite a label, and boom, you have a museum that exists for a couple of hours. They've happened places like this is in a bank parking lot that had been the former location of Chinatown that had been destroyed 75 years ago, and people coming and sharing their objects and stories about that Chinatown that was completely wiped off the map of downtown Santa Cruz. Here's one that happened with an intact group, a group at a Baptist church sharing their own objects and stories in their space. Marjorie Schwartzer's here. Early in the pop-up museum universe, one of our staff came up and worked with some foster youth who she was working with to create their own pop-up museum of their stories and objects. For us, the pop-up museum has been a way to be able to say yes to everyone who wants a museum. We have one going actually right now on the theme of Define American with the Watsonville Film Festival. And it's been a way for us to say, you know what, we are not going to manage every one of these. It's not going to be museum quality. Instead, we're going to spend our time creating a platform and a system that anybody can use to feel like they're part of the museum and to have a museum experience. And I'll just note that the pop-up museum, if you search popupmuseum.org, it is now a toolkit that anybody can download and create a pop-up museum anywhere in the world. And again, that's what a platform can get you, is instead of thinking about how many staff do we need to deliver these services, thinking about how can we create a platform that's really for everyone. So I think we're doing pretty well. I think what we'll do is we'll take a couple of questions and then we're going to dive into an activity. And I just want to note, as you're thinking about a question maybe, that there are Post-its on your table. And so I invite you also to do some distribution of the large Post-its and maybe get out a pen. And does anybody have any questions? We can do about 5 minutes of questions.